So now I'm going to review LSG heading into the IPL 2025. Now the first 2 years of LSG there were some good results. However, last year they finished in 7th place and there were certainly some holes in that squad. So heading into this year, what have they done? Well, firstly, they haven't retained KL Rahul. He decided he wanted to go back into the mega auction. They retained 5 players. So if we just look at their lineup, they retained Nicolas Pooran at 21 crore. They retained Ayush Badoni at 4 crore as an uncapped player. Ravi Bishnoi at 11 crore. And then over here, they retained Mayank Yadav at 11 crore and Mohsin Khan at 4. So they went into the auction with a reasonable amount of money, and it was very clear early on they had one target. The target they had was to replace KL Rahul with, I guess, a face of the brand or a face of the team, and obviously a high quality player. And the one player that went back into the mega auction that they obviously took a fancy for was Rishabh Pant. So they pretty much broke the bank to get Rishabh Pant. They paid 27 crore for him. We know that he's a fine player, and since then he's been named captain. And I'm assuming that he's going to also be the wicketkeeper. As we know, Pooran is more than capable in the field. So what I want us to do is just go through the way LSG is looking from a batting 11 perspective, and it's going to obviously go through some big holes that have come up in recent times, but even at the auction time, there were some real holes in the lower half of this order. So firstly, I'm going to look at Mitchell Marsh. Now Mitchell Marsh can't bowl this year's IPL, so he's got to be seen purely as a batsman. He has opened for Australia. Obviously, he's batted at 3, so he would love to go out there, bat against in the power play, and he's would look to take that on. Now they do have Aiden Markram, who pretty much is the only other overseas batsman in there, other than Matthew Bretsky, who could bat at the top of the order. And I don't think they'll go for Bretsky because Aiden Markram is a proven performer already in the IPL, albeit he's done most of his good work down here at 4 and 5. But they don't really, I think if they were to pick Matthew Bretsky and open with him, they would leave out one of their better players. And that sort of is the start of the problems, I think, that you see with this squad with LSG. Not particularly well balanced. So we look at Nicolas Pooran, wonderful player. I think all of his best runs have been scored at 3. We know he's a wonderful finisher as well, but if he scores runs, your team generally wins. So that'll be why they've spent the high price of 21 crore for him. And he's a much improved player from 3 years ago when they originally got hold of him. Rishabh Pant, we know, I don't think he'll bat any lower than 4. I know he can bat sort of 4, 5, 6. He could even bat 3, to be fair, as he batted for India at the World Cup in the West Indies. But I think he will slot in at 4 there and try and control those middle overs. You've got Ayush Badoni, who was a retained player. He's generally been batting around the 6, 7 mark. But I think he is probably going to have to step up, being a right-hander amongst all of these left-handers. So Pooran, Rishabh Pant, David Miller, Shahbaz Ahmed. It'll be an absolute... a real surprise to me if sides don't target these guys with off-spin, especially through those middle overs. You could even bowl off-spin at both ends if you get 2 left-handers on and there's a little bit of hold in the surface. So Ayush Badoni will have to break that up. David Miller, wonderful finisher. He's in probably the form of his life, and he has been over the last few years, so a very good pickup for LSG. Once again, though, another left-hander, but he is a power player and he is a guy who can win a game from anywhere. Okay. So that is where you've got to you basically use all 4 of your overseas slots. So if you go in Marsh, you go in Markram, you go in Pooran, and you go in David Miller, then basically all 4 of your overseas slots have been filled up in your top 6. That's where your big problems start. And these problems started well before the injury issues with LSG. So I think they will look, obviously, for a left-arm spinner. Shahbaz Ahmed is probably more of a batting all-rounder, his numbers suggest in T20 cricket. In 55 matches, he picked up just the 21 wickets, average of 40 with the ball, and gone at 9.35 and over. So as your front left-arm spinner, or front-line left-arm spinner, I'm not sure he's the answer, but he does provide some batting depth. I think he's actually a really nice player with a bat, but hasn't quite got it right with the ball yet. The other option is they'll go with Manamaran Siddharth, who is an exciting left-arm spinner from Tamil Nadu. Domestic numbers are exceptional, averages around about 10, just over 5 runs and over, but that is in domestic cricket. And Shahbaz Ahmed's bowling in domestic cricket is also, his numbers are also very good, albeit not quite as good as Siddharth's. So whether he can transfer that skill into the IPL, time will tell. He certainly wouldn't be batting at 7, he'd be batting far further down. Then we talk about the bowlers, and before we do, I'm going to just move over here to who are the bowlers that are currently at the NCA. And this is as of yesterday. So they're basically Avesh Khan, who they paid 9.75 crore at. He is currently at the NCA injury. Mayank Yadav, 11 crore. Now, that one to me was an interesting one. I mean, I think everybody was excited when Mayank Yadav came on the scene. He bowled 150 k's an hour, played for India, exciting. He still only played 4 IPL games. And his injury history throughout his whole career, domestically, so with Delhi domestically, and in the IPL, he's had major injury issues. So to spend 11 crore on a player like that and retain him is a huge risk. Now, hopefully they will get benefits in years 2 and 3 with Mayank Yadav. Hopefully he will recover from those injuries. But to spend that amount of money on an unproven player in terms of someone who can stand up and play more than 2 games in a row is a big risk. Mohsin Khan, they got him at 4 crore as an uncapped player. Missed most the following year also with a major injury, and he's also now got another one and at the NCA as well. And Akashdeep, who I've spent a lot of time with Akashdeep, I think he's a very fine 4-day bowler, test bowler. In terms of T20, he is a developing bowler, certainly not a proven one yet. And I think to spend 8 crore on an unproven player is fine if you've got a lot of experience around that. And you look at the rest of the bowling lineup of LSG, there's no leader. There's no one in that squad who you would say is going to be the bowler, the leader of the bowling attack. They've only got one overseas bowler, which is Shamar Joseph, who also is a test bowler and hasn't proven himself at all in T20 cricket. He is the only overseas bowler. However, he is not injured, which is promising, and he might have to slot in here somewhere to try and cover all of these gaps that are currently in place with LSG. By doing that, though, you've obviously got to leave out one of these 4 from an overseas perspective. And I can only see them leaving out one of the top 2 and maybe bringing in a Yuvraj Chowdhury, who is an exciting batsman from Uttarakhand. Very good domestic numbers at the moment, a good power player as well, and they might have to make a sacrifice. I don't think they'll go for Asim Kalkani. They used him for a couple of games last year with limited success, but they clearly see something in him, hence the reason why they've brought him back, an ex-under-19 Indian player. So I've already talked about the backups of the batting side of things. Rishabh Pant, they've got a backup in Arun Jayal. Obviously, they've got Nicolas Pooran, who could keep, but he's a promising player. Abdul Samad, come from SRH, big power player, had been retained by SRH previously, so they obviously rated him. He is a power player, and in a normal lineup, he would be the perfect impact sub. Somebody that could come in, potentially slot in at 7 and have a big impact. I'm just not sure how they could do that because none of these guys bowl. Marsh doesn't bowl anymore. Markram does bowl some offies. Obviously, you've got a couple of keepers. Badoni, maybe the odd offie. Miller doesn't bowl. So you really have to have your impact player as a bowler as well to be able to make that side stack up. So it's probably unfortunate, but Abdul Samad is probably competing with Ayush Badoni, who was a retained player, to even make that lineup. But he would, he's a high quality player that will be sitting on the sideline. Talked about Siddharth, and that's an interesting swap potentially for Shahbaz Ahmed if they want to go for more of a bowling all-rounder than a batting all-rounder of Shahbaz. And then, as I said, Rathi is a nice backup leg spinner for Ravi Bishnoi. Outside of that, as I said, depending on what happens here, will very much depend on the cover that LSG end up with. So, once again, let's come back. I'm a little bit worried for LSG, I'm sure you can tell, because with all of these issues, there's a bit of talk about Shardul Thakur maybe coming in. There's a bit of talk about Shivam Mavi coming in. Both more experienced IPL than these current players. but that hasn't been signed off yet. Even if they do come in, you've still got massive holes to fill. So I've put in here Hungragaka, who was at CSK. He was a high-priced player a few years ago. Went to CSK, played a handful of games, if that. Didn't really progress at the pace that anyone would have liked, but he might have to play. He might have to slot into that lineup. Akash Singh, the left arm quick, who swings the new ball, is decent with the new ball, but struggles at other phases. He might have to play, looking at the lineup. You've got Prince Yadav, who's a nice right arm quick from Delhi, tall, bowls a good Yorker. He might have to even slot into the playing 11. So there's not really a lot of point talking about who might be this impact rule or who might be this impact player, because to be fair, there's a whole heap of unknowns in terms of who's actually going to end up playing for LSG in that first game. Hopefully one of these four might be able to come in here and slot in. Otherwise, you might see a Shamar Joseph slot in and one of the openers drop out. So many questions in this LSG lineup. And in all honesty, it goes back to the auction where as soon as they got Rishabh Pant, they pretty much fell asleep at the wheel from a bowling perspective. And I don't think that's being too harsh. I think that even if these guys are fit, that bowling attack is still really undermanned and underclassed. But then you add players in there who have had injury history, and there's not a lot of surprises in terms of the fact you've got at least a couple of those. The fact they've got 4 is incredibly unlucky, but it doesn't hide from the fact that the auction strategy was flawed. So if I look at, it starts playing 27 Crore for Rishabh Pant is fine, but you've already paid 21 for Nicolas Pooran. There's 48 Crore spent on 2 players covering one particular role. The other part of this squad is that the Akana, their home ground, does have red and black soil. So if you had like a spin heavy lineup or a seam heavy lineup, you could kind of adjust it to suit your bowling skill. But I don't think you can adjust. I don't think you can adjust anything to make that bowling lineup a successful one. And then it comes back to, I've heard Zahir Khan come out and said a need to play attacking cricket. And Zach he's a very fine bowler, very experienced person involved in the IPL, hugely successful. And I have a lot of time for Zach. And he's spot on because, to be fair, I think LSG are going to have to try and chase because they're not going to be able to defend anything with that lineup. So from a batting point of view, I think it's about holding on with the ball as best you can. Ravi Bishnoi is going to have to play a big role in that. He's probably the one banker they have in that lineup. And then they're basically going to have to try and chase anything. And I think you can. With that top 6, you can chase anything. Whereas trying to defend will be incredibly difficult for Rishabh Pant and that bowling lineup. Ultimately, I think Justin Langer certainly has his hands full with that lineup. I'm not so sure how much he was involved in the auction, but I can't see that he would have been happy come the end of the auction with the balance that they had. Albeit they've got some very fine players, but the balance was always very flawed. So it's a shame to say, but every one of those 10 teams have fine players in them. LSG will no doubt win some games because they have some class in the batting lineup, but I just cannot see them getting above 10th place. Even if they get a few of these bowlers back, I think it's an imbalanced side, and I think the one thing you know about sides that win the IPL is that they have very good bowling lineups. The only exception to that, I guess, is SRH last year. They didn't win it. They were beaten by KKR, who ultimately had a better bowling lineup. But generally, the sides that do very well are bowler heavy. They have high quality bowlers and they have the skills spread throughout the side. So I think a pretty big learning for LSG this year. And I think we'll see some real changes come next year, but I can't see them moving above 10th place in 2025.